I've been involved with the co-housing movement for about probably about 10 years when we started working on Wild Sage. And since then I've worked on Silver Sage co-housing with Chuck Durrett and collaborated with another number of other co-housing professionals and really found a niche here in the market. I have a small architecture practice of 5 or 6 people, and we do other kinds of work, resort work, and lots of other things as well. I live in the community I design, so and that's actually worked out pretty well. People have a few horror stories about that, but overall it's been pretty great. Day 2 or 3, I think, after we moved in, somebody came and knocked on my door and said, "Hey, Bryan, I've got this problem. My toilet won't flush." And I said, that's really funny because when I drew it, it flushed just fine. So, it's been about holding boundaries and about just being understanding with my community members that, they're going to ask me for some things and sometimes I'm going to say no. I think that, convention dictates that we don't ask the future homeowners what they want, that we rely on what past homeowners bought. But if the past homeowners were only offered a couple of options, how would we know what they really want? So it's much easier to actually engage with people and talk to them and find out what they need and then give them that. And if you get them engaged in a process and get them engaged in a community interaction with others, then that becomes their product. When I walk around Wild Sage, people say, I'll see them touring their moms around or things like that, and they'll say, "Yeah, this is the place. I designed this community. I think it's great." It, to me, tells me that we've done a great job. And it also takes a lot of the risk out. We have a much stronger sense of what's going to work if we've asked the people who are going to buy it. There have been all kinds of things done. There are sod hut buildings, there are straw bale buildings, there are rammed earth and tire buildings, earth ships, things like that. And I think all of those techniques and approaches can be applied to community at different scales. So you can't build a high-rise out of straw bales, but if you're doing a lower density project, especially if you're in an agrarian place with a good supply of labor, it might be a really good solution. If you are, depending on the climate and the goals are, I think all those different material choices pan out differently. And I think on the one hand, there are tons of little or very big, cool, cutting-edge, high-tech gadgetry objects that we can apply, whether it's the bloom box for your window or whether it's the newest, coolest PV cell or whether it's just whatever the newest gadget is. That end of things is really burgeoning fast, and there's a strong sense that we need those things because we're Americans and we like to buy things to solve problems. I actually feel like the strongest cutting edge piece of design is in site design and in orientation of the buildings and in creating public places that work, site designs that create interactions, designing communities that are machines for reinforcing community interactions that are healthy. I think that is the real cutting edge as opposed to the sort of technological cutting edge that we're usually seeing. And that I'm saying that as a guy who uses a lot of those technologies, and we do a lot of high-tech buildings, but I think the thing that people miss the most is facing south. Everything that you can do with the natural sun and wind should be done. So I am pretty convinced that in your climate, you should be able to get all of your heating energy, passive solar-wise. Cooling energy is a different question. There are some really interesting things being done with cooling towers, and we've done some stuff, and there's actually a really interesting project in, I think it's Zion National Park that has a great passive cooling tower. There are also some new products out there. One's called the Colorado. It's a product that's built here in Colorado. It's a direct-indirect evaporative cooler. So it uses evaporation to create the coolness, and then an air-to-air heat exchanger to move that coolness into the building as opposed to bringing the cool, humid air into the building itself, so you don't have humidity issues. We try to design towards our ecological community and towards our human habitation community, and so sort of from a permaculture standpoint, we're looking at a very wide definition of that. So to take it back the other direction and look at community in terms of the specific dynamic between people that creates the sense of interconnectedness. I think that it creates Well, first off, it satisfies some very human needs. People need interaction. They need affection. They need love. There's a bunch of different ways this has been expressed. If you look at the NVC, nonviolent communication needs words, that list, if you look at that list, that's what we're doing in co-housing. David Wan in his presentation had a list of words that was very similar to that. That's what we're doing in co-housing. It's what we're all striving for, whether it's through church or through bridge club or poker night or the neighborhood bar or the third place, all those things. So I think we all crave it. And I think that community is then the way we are able to organize and achieve things. It's also the way we're able to discern things. We're able to find out deeper truths by thinking about them together. If I just plug along in my own isolation and I don't engage in any productive work or effort with other people, then nothing really comes up unless I bring it up. So, and by actually getting out in the garden and doing stuff together, or by cooking meals together, or by trying to change a policy by going to visit city council together, those things are what really create inner and sort of small scale society revelations, which are what creates change. So I attended a session at the Rocky Mountain Institute with the woman who wrote the book on biomimicry recently, and we went through an exercise of design that I thought was really interesting. And so I think there are a lot of buildings that are overtly doing biomimicry in a form pattern. So they're trying to look like something that's biological. I think in some ways that can be totally missing the point, because I think what really is working in nature isn't so much about form, but about pattern and about interaction and systems. So I think there's some very successful buildings that do that without sort of looking like plant material. A lot of our work actually, the systems are designed to interact with each other and with the people who live there. And that's, like organs in a body, a very important way to respond to climate and changes and to people's sense of comfort and to weather patterns and seasonal changes and all those things. I think that, sort of to quote Bill McDonough, buildings like trees, cities like forests, I think is a really interesting concept. Also to think about the cradle-to-cradle idea of waste equals food. How do we create systems that are naturally interdependent in a way that creates resilience, not just aesthetic mimicry? For example, the roof of a building receives a lot of energy that's available to it. So if we can harvest that energy instead of getting rid of that energy, then we're starting to do things that are like nature, like trees. Trees create leaves when there's enough energy to justify creating leaves. When there's not, they go away. So I think buildings can follow that same pattern. I think having a sharp contrast between density and openness is the way to do that. By allowing the buildings and the habitable space, the daily habitable space of the community to be fairly dense and interconnected, then people have that as a sort of a spine for the community. But then having a pressure relief valve of open space and private space, whether it's sort of nude sunbathing space or whether it's a city's open space or mountains or whether it's farms adjacent to community, I think that can be handled in a lot of different ways. And I would tie that back to the question of the needs people have, whether their needs can be satisfied by one thing or another. I think real dense communities tend to have more issues with privacy, but density next to open space may alleviate both and also create a really nice sense of connection to nature and an understanding of natural patterns, especially if the community design respects natural patterns and deals well with stormwater and with existing vegetation and existing topography and existing views and all those things which are usually not harvested by the developers who view a site as ready to start with once it's already been scraped free of everything. By not trying to finish them, as architects, we tend to want to make projects that look complete when we walk away. But if you make space for people to engage with the landscape and engage with the buildings, then people do it. Just as a small example that was very affordable and didn't cost a lot of money at all, we used something called crusher fines for the patios at Wild Sage. It's a crushed gravel product that just is a result of other processes. So it's really low cost, and it's permeable, so it lets the rain enter the ground, and it compacts over time and makes a nice surface. But it also kind of tracks on your shoes, and when you sit on it in a chair, one leg might go into the ground a little bit. So ultimately people want to switch it out for things. So at Wild Sage we have 20 or 30 different patios that were laid by different people that are all beautiful. So that was something that we could never have organized, but we simply created the possibility for it in the design. The other thing is that in dense communities, it's a little more important to do that. If you're in a real rural setting, then the projects that you can undertake as a group are pretty wide and pretty varied. Whereas in a tighter place like Wild Sage or Silver Sage, you're looking at a pretty limited physical environment. I'll tell you a story. Holiday Neighborhood, when it was planned, had a park and a playground. After we all moved in, we found that the city's plan for the park was to build it in between 10 and 15 years after we moved in, which all the young families of the community didn't really like. We all wanted to have our kids over there before they were 17. So we wanted to get going. And so we went and met with the city. We didn't rabble-rouse. We asked them questions, and we learned what the environment was for them, why it wasn't going to be funded in the way that we hoped it would be. And we discovered that their funding strategy had two separate piles of money. One was for operations and one was for capital improvements. The operations pile was empty. They didn't have any money to run any more parks, so they weren't starting any more parks. The capital improvements pile was giant. Because they hadn't been able to start any new parks, the capital improvements pile of money was getting bigger and bigger. So we said, well, let's make a deal. We'll take HOA funds. We will pay for the operations of the park, and then we'll fundraise for construction of the park and try to do it ourselves. And they said, that's great. So we worked really hard on fundraising, and the big grant that we went after didn't come through. And soon after we found that out, the city builder said, well, you know what? You guys have really worked hard. We do have the ability to allocate capital money towards this project when we're going to do it. So they funded the project. It got built. The community played a big role in the design of it. So we got together and said, what do we want? We want to have an intergenerational playground. So what does that look like? How do we get adults to play with kids? Usually the standard scene is adults standing around, hopefully talking to each other, but maybe looking other directions with each other around the perimeter, while the kids play in the middle. We wanted to have a different dynamic, so we put the playground around picnic tables and with seating spaces inside the playground. And then we built a climbing structure. Boulder's a very big climbing location, so we built a climbing structure in there that was fun to climb on for adults and for kids. And I've gone out there and I've seen 60-year-old men climbing with 5-year-olds. Does not happen very often in a park setting.